G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. Today we're talking about yet another new Nikon Z native mount lens. It's another 85mm 1.8. It is the Aster Hori 85 1.8 Z fully autofocus lens. It's built like a tank. It's pretty beautifully built. It's got a metal mount. It's got metal everything actually. It's got the weight to boot and a beautiful front element. How can you go wrong? Well, I have seen a few other reviews out there on the interwebs talking about the fact that this lens is not as sharp as they would like it to be. This is not exactly my experience. And I want to touch on just very quickly the idea, one, about warranties. In every country, with all sorts of products, we get warranties. And that is because some things leave the factory either not, they're already DOA, which means dead on arrival, or they stop functioning within a 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 year period, depending on who, where, why, and what. That's what warranties are for. And there's a reason for it. It's because a certain percentage of products fail, and that might be 1% or 5%. I'm sure it's a pretty low number. And it's happened to all of us. It's even happened to me with the odd Apple product. Yes, Apple are very good at this. Things rarely fail, but they do sometimes fail. That's number one. Number two, specific to what we're doing here, which is reviewing pre-production copies of lenses, cameras, and so on. I have read that pre-production lenses that are sent out are sometimes actually handmade. So this is before the production line is up to full speed, everything is calibrated, everything is organized, and the machinery is doing what it does automatically. And what that means to me is if a lens is being more handmade, even if it's only a very small percentage of it is handmade and other parts of it are done with the production line, with the assembly line, it does allow margin for error, human error, and so on. These things can always happen. And that is something that we do have to be super mindful of when reviewing pre-production units. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 4 weeks, sometimes it's 2 months before a product is announced, let alone when it ships. The longest amount of time I've had a product before it's publicly announced is somewhere in the 4 to 5 month region. So we might not be getting final units, and that is absolutely something we have to take into account when we're making these early pre-production reviews. G'day everybody, I just needed to jump into this video because I think I've had a bit more of a think about it, and there's more to it, us being NDA reviewers. The whole point of an NDA review or a pre-launch review is at the intention of the company that has invited me or anybody else to be part of what's going on. We're invited. It's probably, in the case of any product, anywhere between 5 and maybe at most 25 channels that will get invited to be part of these NDA launch videos. It's less than 1% of YouTubers get this invitation. It's critical for us when we're invited. Not only do we have to understand the intention of the company, but we also need to understand the intention of the product. What are they trying to achieve with this new creation? And it's not about our use case or how we normally use equipment. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. What it's about is going, okay, this is a portrait lens, or this is a birding lens, or this is a vlogging lens. That's the prism that we have to think about a product through. That's not anybody telling us what to do. That's us being professional reviewers. And if we can't separate our own needs, wants, and desires, our own use cases from the intention of the company and the intention of the product, then we shouldn't be invited. That's as simple as that. And I think when we're talking about less than 1%, and in most cases it's probably more like 1 in 1,000 channels get this sort of opportunity, I don't have any problem. I think it's totally appropriate for us to be professional. Now, why this is normal and makes complete sense for me is I've done nothing different my whole career. I have been a professional photographer.
Always your role is to work out what your collaborator's intention is. That's actually the number one thing you do. What are they trying to say? What are they trying to share with the world?
To me, it's just a professional approach. Now, that professional doesn't mean we can't have fun. It doesn't have to include use case and opinions. Of course, all those things can be there as well. It doesn't mean they can't, Understanding that intention does not change what we say, like, this is a birding lens, so it's no good at macro photography. Of course, you still need to say that, but don't come out and say, this is a birding lens and at macro photography, it's a fail. That was never the intention. Okay, so yes, this lens, not everybody's been happy with it. I've seen one review that's not happy, whereas I've seen others that are fine. What's my personal experience? This lens can be sharp, but you have to work out how to make it do that. I don't think it works as well as Nikon native lenses when it's coupled to the Z cameras. And what I mean by that is, at this stage, I am very used to lenses just reacting precisely and exactly the way I expect them to. It's fast, focus is quick, and IBIS is functioning exactly how I would expect it to. That's the experience that I have with Nikon first-party lenses, and that's the experience I have really with the majority of third-party lenses from every manufacturer. Some things I've observed with this lens is this. The lens is sharp, but the autofocus, sometimes you just need to kind of massage it slightly to get to the point where it's in focus. So that's one thing, that's it. And the other thing is IBIS. The way that the camera is treating this lens is not the same that it treats, say, Nikon lenses, the 85, 1.8, 1.2, the Plena. These things are almost like they're on a tripod handheld. That's how amazing they feel. For some reason, this lens is a little bit jittery from an IBIS perspective, and it's a little bit jittery from a focus perspective. So what this makes me think is, it's not about this lens being sharp or not, it's actually about the electronic communication between the camera and the lens. And because this is the first autofocus lens that Astahory has made, I think they're just still wrapping their head around all of that. And it may well be as simple as their firmware and getting the conversation between lens and camera working right. So to just repeat what I said, it's a little bit jittery in IBIS, but it still works. It's a little bit jittery in autofocus, but it still works. You just have to kind of massage it slightly. And I think this is firmware / electronic. I don't think it's the optical capabilities of this lens, because I've been able to get perfectly in focus shots. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about with this lens is how ridiculously affordable it is. It's extremely affordable for a lens of this build quality and of this speed, an 85mm 1.8. And thus, when we ever think about purchasing something, are we getting the features we want? And the other one is the cost. Now, sometimes we will accept lower features, a lower standard, because we like the cost. And it's no different here. I don't expect this lens, when it's like a half or a third of the cost of the 85mm 1.8S, to be the same. I don't expect that. I have no expectation of that, and it's not, and it won't be. It's not 3 times worse, even so it's 3 times cheaper. So I think that's just something that we have to keep in mind. This will not run at the same level because it is not the same price point. That is not what the manufacturer is trying to do. They're trying to bring you a product at a price point. That's their #1 goal, of a reasonable standard that will get you across the line. So let's talk about the lens.
Z8, the Astahory 85 1.8 FX, meaning full frame lens. 100% pixel for pixel, I think we can call that sharp. Great image, don't mind the fall off. Is there a little bit of vignetting? Maybe the slightest amount. Most of these images are shot at 1.8. So this is all worst case scenario. Have a look at this building here. I think that looks pretty sharp. Now, this is a hazy beach with sea spray, and this is where we can see some fringing. We've got a little bit of green fringing going on here, definitely going on here. But let's not forget, this is some of the harshest conditions that you can throw at a lens and a camera system. We have the sun as the backlight here. It doesn't get harder than this. What I want to continue to talk about is the intention of this lens. And after spending some time with it and looking at the images and understanding the sort of flare that's built into this lens. There's the flare on the left there. This is the sun, which is off, out of frame, but creates this halo all the way through here. And it just has a really beautiful cinematic look to it. So it's possible, it's arguable that this lens is perhaps better for cinematography and could be quite an interesting cinematography lens versus still photography, or if you want still photography to have a certain look. Now, what's interesting to me is you hear so many people talking about lenses being clinical and they want the look, they want the character, and then when they get a lens that's got a look and it's got some character, a lens that's not perfect, it's not perfectly sharp, it's not sharp in the corners, it's got flare, it's got a little bit of aberrating, and then suddenly people are complaining that it's not as sterile as they want it to be. And I kind of don't get it, because what is it? At the end of the day, I think manufacturers can do a whole range of different things. We can have lenses that are full and absolutely oozing with character, and then we can have lenses that are great for forensic usage. Or, like me, I like my lenses sharp and contrasty and giving me everything, and then I can create a look in post if I choose to or not. These are just choices. But I think this lens has its place. It has a lot of character. A very rainy day at the beach, and this is telling the story of that exactly. We can see a little bit of the vignetting up there in the corner. Very minor, and we are at 1.8. We're just going to fly through because I've actually got a lot of images. Handheld, 1/60th of a second, f1.8 at nighttime, 100%. We're not in the center of the frame, which is where it is sharpest. Everybody has seen that. But I think this is a pretty good result, and I want to remind everybody I've been shooting with, for example, the Nikon F-mount 1.4 85mm lens, which cost me probably 4 or 5 times what the price of this lens would be today, this new Z-mount lens. And honestly, I think this lens is probably similar or slightly better than the F-mount lens for a quarter or a fifth of the cost. And so you just have to kind of keep that all in account, balance all that out. There are still people moving from DSLR. They want to have a native Z-mount lens. They don't want to go backwards. This lens is not a big leap forwards, but it's still on par or perhaps slightly better than the previous lenses they might have been using. And if they weren't using the best 85mm 1.8 or 1.4 of the F-mount era, then this lens is likely to be better, and it's extraordinarily affordable. So there's just a lot to think about there, about intention, use case, people's budgets, where they're coming from, where they're going to. Maybe they're a hobbyist, maybe they're an enthusiast, maybe they've never had a lens faster than 3.5, and this is just exciting. We all started somewhere. I remember my first lens that I had was a Chiron. I think it was a 3.5 to 5.6, 28 to 210 or something like that. So when I started to get fast prime lenses, it was so exciting. And I can tell you, they were not any better than the lens that you can see here. I think that looks slightly sharper. I can't recall why that might be. It could be camera shake, because as I talked about, I don't think the in-body image stabilization is working optimally yet with this lens. I think that's something that needs to be ironed out. 640 ISO, 1/60th of a second handheld at night, f1.8. 100% pixel for pixel. And that's not exactly the center of the frame, by the way. 60th of a second, 640 ISO. I think that's handling that very well. And based on previous F-mount lenses, actually think this is better. This image actually has pop. It's got dimensionality about it. Color rendition is absolutely spot on. And it's all about use case. Like if you are traveling, if you're doing, I think this lens would be great for portraiture because it's actually soft, so it's not too hardcore. A lot of people say lenses that are too sharp are actually not good for portraiture. So this might actually be great. A lens like this has its place, and that's what people need to think about. If someone who's reviewing a lens like this and their use cases do not fit this lens, then they're not going to have a good time with it. That's why sometimes you've got to step outside of what you normally do to understand where it might fit in. Now here we are looking at the out of focus areas, and I think they're quite nice. Nothing more than we would expect. That we do have lemons on the sides or cat's eyes on the sides of the frame. There's a little bit of swirling going on there in the middle. I think that's actually very pleasing bokeh. I think that looks actually quite good. It was very dark, quite hard to get that in focus, and then we've got the beautiful Ferris wheel in the background. I actually really like the softness of this image. I like the way that this lens is handling my very bright light on the front of my bike. I kind of can't fault this image as a piece of art, and that's the other thing that needs to be taken into account. We are looking for differences in lenses so we can create different types of expression. Not just every lens being perfect, and so we all have perfect expression. Not to say you can't do that in post. There's nothing wrong with a lens like this, which is giving us a very specific look, which I think is pleasing. I actually think it works.
Very basic shot. There's the table and shares. 1/25 of a second handheld, 1.8, 640 ISO. Is it perfect? No. But if you're traveling and you're on a budget, this lens, it's giving you fantastic nighttime photography. And I do think remember, we've got 85mm. It's a 1/25th, or in this case, a 1/30th of a second. If your IBIS isn't functioning properly, I do think at this sort of point with this lens, at the moment, if they don't get some firmware going, we are on the verge of getting camera shake. And I think that's why this is not perfectly sharp. And that's something to think about with this lens until they address that. I love this shot. And I was going for this deck chair here being in focus, but because we're at 1.8 and because the edges of this lens are not perfectly sharp, we can see that it's not perfectly sharp, but it doesn't change the success of the image. I would still put this image in a book. I would still publish this image. Again, something else to think about, that ultimately human beings respond to the story first, and acute, absolute, critical sharpness is a distant second when you're talking about photos that are created for and from an emotional perspective rather than from a scientific or technical perspective. For example, if you are photographing a bird and you're wanting to show its beautiful feathers, then sharpness is probably part of that story. When you're trying to paint with light and paint a picture of a city at night and give the sense of depth, the mood in the moment, I believe that absolute sharpness in these moments are secondary to storytelling. In other words, it's far better to have gotten the shot than to not have gotten it at all. Now, this is showing the flare. Now, unbelievably, what we can see here in the right of frame, that is the flare that this lens creates. I love it. It's got a really beautiful vibe to it, and I just kept messing around with it. But if you have a look here on the left, this image is unadjusted. This is how it's coming straight into Capture One, and I just love this summertime vibe. Some might think that this flare is distracting. You know, you're looking to buy an affordable 85mm 1.8, and you'll look at this review and you'll go, I don't want that. Don't buy this. But if you go, oh, that's interesting, this is a great option. The flare is not in there all the time. You have to get the lens in a very specific spot. And if you move ever so slightly, it's gone again. Don't get me wrong, the flare's not sitting there all the time. You have to work hard to get it to appear like this. And if you move 1/10 of a degree in any direction, X, Y, or Z, it's gone. It's starting to disappear. I like it. It's bringing character. 1/50th, 1.8 ISO 64 handheld. There's that flare. Astohori 85, a Z9. These all have a very strong emotional feel to them because of the way this lens is created, quite warm. This is me playing with depth of field. We're starting here at f2 and then going through to f5, f11, and the focus is here on the foreground, all the way through to f14. Yes, we've got some fringing. Yes, it's not clinically sharp. But are we telling a story? Is this about time and place? Can we use this lens to tell the story of whatever we're doing? And the answer is yes, we can. It is not failing to do that. Will it do it in all circumstances and all use cases? No, it probably won't, because some people do want everything to be clinically sharp. And that is about you deciding on your use case. It doesn't mean this lens is a fail. You just need to be aware that this is more of a brushstroke lens rather than a pixel for pixel lens. Another look at what the bokeh balls and the just general background out of focus areas look like. I think it is sharp enough there in the background, and I just wanted to show what does that depth of field look like? What does the out of focus areas look like? I like this rendition. I've been shooting and publishing for 35 years, and this result is fantastic. If I look back over the previous 30 years, 28 years, I didn't have glass that could do better than this, and it's only in the absolute awesomeness of mirrorless and Z-mount and S-line glass that I can go beyond this. So ultimately what I want to say about this lens is, 1, it's built for a price. It's extraordinarily affordable for what it is. 2, it isn't perfect, it isn't precise, but it still allows us to tell stories and capture light. It's really important for us to remember that there are more metrics for us to work by than just simply the best metric for every metric, the highest metric, the sharpest metric, the fastest metric. These are not the only metrics that are important to telling stories, capturing mood,
to sharing emotion. And at the end of the day, if this lens allows somebody who's never had an 85mm 1.8 before to afford one, and then they go and tell stories that resonate for them, the people around them, and it moves them forward in life to a happier place because they're able to express themselves, absolute sharpness, chromatic aberration, purple fringing, corner sharpness, contrast or not, flare or not, literally those things become irrelevant if somebody is creating. And that is the most important part of our photography journeys, is continuing to live life and create.
I just want to stress that a lens like this, it comes in at a price point, it completely works. I think where we're getting a little bit of jitters is firmware related. It's how this lens is talking to the camera and the camera is responding. That's what I think is going on, because I can very clearly see the jittering in the IBIS, which just does not exist. It does not exist on any native Nikon Z lens. And I haven't quite seen this sort of thing on really any other third-party lens, whether it's a Tamron or a Viltrox. All of these companies are now getting full autofocus going. I think because this company is doing a first, they're still ironing out some bugs. This is a pre-production copy, so the firmware in here, let's be honest, it might not even be finished. Well, they're the things I wanted you to think about. Love the build quality. No buttons. We do have a USB-C port there to update that firmware that I was talking about. No buttons, no switches, no aperture. You've simply got a focus ring, and if you want to use that focus ring, then you have to go into the camera, turn it to manual, and then you're in focus. Yes, it's a bit stiff. I think it's worth revisiting this lens and whatever they do in the future in order to see Aster-Horri as another third-party lens supplier. See how they progress. They're new to the market, and we should be embracing their desire to bring autofocus, Z lenses, auto aperture, metadata, the whole thing. We should be embracing and encouraging them to do that, because the more options, the merrier, the more competition, the more everything that goes on gets advanced. And I think at the end of the day, that's only a good thing. Yes, it can improve, but it does work. I'd love to know your thoughts about all of this. What do you think about pre-production units? And will you buy one? Let me know. All right, it's been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, I'd love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, see ya.